You enjoyed your morning and learned a lot of information on any of our other sessions. Today we're going to talk about fixed assets and what you need to do to get started to be able to use the application. There's just a few small quick steps as far as doing that. So, but first, you have to sit back and kind of ask yourself, why would I want to track my fixed assets? And there's a couple good reasons. I'm sure you have other reasons as well. But I mean, the one big thing is, well, where's my stuff? I have all these cars and desks and chairs, and where are they? What building are they in? Who's using them? So, yep. The next thing is.
Hold on, I don't. You get your mouse. I can't find it. Oh, it's over there. Click that. Sorry. They could hear you, but it just wasn't displaying on the screen.
Okay. Apologize for that delay. So just, a couple questions that we ask ourselves is where is my stuff? How much do we have? Can help with, when you're preparing your budget for next year, do I really need to order a new desk or new chair? Or maybe the equipment's old and outdated, so you need to plan to order more. So, a third reason that you want to track your assets is to make sure that you're not overpaying on your insurance, like your cars and everything. And, maybe they're overvalued or undervalued, and you just want to make sure that you're spending the right amount for those assets on any insurance costs. So with that in mind, we're going to move on. And we'll talk about a few key features of the system. So fixed assets application is one place that you can go to maintain, review, and analyze your assets. You can get information about additions and depreciate them if you wish. You can dispose of the assets, and you can also transfer them to other funds. The application also allows you the ability to, it will calculate the transactions for these activities, and if you want to, then you can send them over to the general ledger to post the general ledger automatically for you. And the third feature that we have here is just a lot of the reporting functions that we have out of the system, similar to a lot of our other applications. So just different ways to report different pieces of information for your board or for yourselves, your auditors, etc. All right. So next we're going to talk about just the main menu portions of the fixed asset screen. We're not going to go into detail on all of them at this time, but I'm just going to show you each of the pieces that we have. The first of which is the main section, which is where you're going to go and basically look at your assets and where we're going to go when we set up them for the first time. The next section is different asset processes, like I alluded to earlier. We have the depreciation, the disposals, transferring of assets, and then we have the accounting update step, which is the step where we send the transactions to the general ledger. Our next category is the report section. Here you can see a list of the reports that we currently have in the system, and it depends on what your needs are. And I think, as if there's something in here that you might need another report, we can always look at that and add new ones as needed. And we'll talk about these reports a little bit later on in the presentation. So the next section is the year-end processes. This is a part that we'll talk about later. It's not part of just getting started and setting up the system. So we're not going to focus on that at all today. And then the last section is your site information. And like a lot of our other applications, a lot of this is one-time setup stuff that you would do. It's where we're going to actually start with, getting started with the application. And so here we're going to use the majority of the menu items. And like I said, it's usually a one-time type of setup that we would do. So now I'm sure you're asking yourself, so how do we get started? So there's just a few steps that we have to do. The first one, like I said, is we have to set up the site parameters, and that's going to involve defining our user data, which is populating the various pick lists that you have in the system as you set up the assets and run processes. The next step is to define your asset types, and then we'll define the ledgers. And the last part then is to go in and set up your assets. So, like I said, the first step is we're going to set up the site. We're going to have our user-defined tables, our asset types, and our ledgers. So, with that, we set up the user tables, and doing that, we set up the list of asset types that you would have, any categories and subcategories, locations, and funding sources. And, one of the reasons for doing that is different asset types depreciate at different rates, and they have, may have other different rules, hit different general ledger accounts and such. So we can categorize those types of things. And like I said, we have the ledgers. So we're going to touch on each of these subjects on the following slides. Okay. So here we have an example of the user-defined table. So the one of the most important ones that you would set up would be the asset types. And here it's going to depend on, what the state requires and what your municipality requires as far as categories. So we just have a few in here. And you can always add to them later, if you find one down the road that you need. Another example that we're going to have are the categories. And you may want to categorize different things more for reporting reasons. So, on your building asset type, you might want to categorize them further into garages or into offices or into storage areas. With vehicles, you may want to, maybe further describe the type of vehicle that you have, or certain pieces of equipment. We have the plow and the trailer and your chairs and desks. So it's not required information. It's just another way for you to customize the system according to your needs. So a couple of the other ones that we have is the location. That's one of those things like, we asked earlier, where is my stuff? You could put in locations as far as, what building a particular piece of equipment is in, or what garage a truck is in. And another one we can do is funding sources, depending on, how you're paying for the asset, whether it's, a capital payment or a contribution. So we can put in whatever your sources are, then you have the opportunity to pick them when you're setting up your assets. Moving on. So once we set up all of our user tables, then we can go in and we can start setting up the asset types. There are actually a few steps in here. I just wanted to show you the screen in here and show you that the first thing you're going to want to pick is the type of asset. And this pick list, again, is based off of the step we did on the user table. The next thing that you'd want to select is your depreciation method. And you also put in a description of the asset. And then the last thing you would select is depreciation, number of months, if you decided to depreciate. If you didn't want to, you could just put a 0 in here, but it is required information. So after we set up the asset types, then our next step, we'd go in and set up the ledgers for each of the asset types. So up in this upper section, we have the asset type that we set up in the previous screen. And then you would have an entry down here for each of the funds that you have on your chart of accounts. And then with the ledgers, there are 6 different types of ledger types that you'd want to use, and these entries vary depending on the type of activity that you're performing in the system. Now, if you're not going to use this part of the system, we would normally just leave the description that you see in the ledger field just so that it's set up. But in this case, I just set up some example accounts for you. And so we have your asset account, which is your actual account has the cost for that particular asset. Then we have your cash account for paying for it. Then we have your depreciation account on here. That would be your accumulated depreciation, your balance sheet account in that case. And then right below it, we have your depreciation expense account. Then the last 2 accounts that you would have would be your profit and loss account for like when you sell the asset to record any profits and losses that you've incurred. And lastly, we have the depreciation expense account, and that's used that's to offset the purchase when you buy the asset. So far we've done the core setup of the system. We've set up our assets. We've gone through. We set up our user tables. We've used that information to set up the asset types, depreciation schedules, and we've defined the ledgers if we wanted to. So at this point, I just wanted to just ask if anybody has any initial questions at this moment.
And we're not sure if you're having audio problems. We just had a question about audio problems. Are you experiencing any audio problems? Can you hear us? There's a chat bar down at the bottom. If you could just say that you're okay hearing us, we'd like to. If you're still in attendance at the session here, if you could open up that green arrow up on your right-hand side, or orange arrow, and just type a message for us. We think we might have lost an internet connection here. Yeah. So if you can hear us, please type a message down at the bottom there. So if you click on that orange arrow, expand that, there's a chat section. Just say you can hear us, and we'll continue the presentation. His question marks are meaning there. Okay. Clement is online. That was the only one that we got a response from. So we will continue on with the presentation, and if you are having technical difficulties, we can follow it up with you. Okay. All right. All right. I'm sorry, Nancy. Go ahead.
Okay.
Your questions, Sage?
Yeah, and this is just an opportunity just to ask a question on the section that we just went through, maybe why it's fresh in your head. But again, you also have the opportunity. We'll have some time at the end, and we'll also have our session at 2 o'clock to ask questions. So don't feel like you have to ask anything at this time. So we did the core setup. We set up everything for our pick lists. So the next step would be to set up our assets in the system. So in doing this, so there's 3 ways to do this, and right now this is the initial setup. So we have a manual method of adding them. We have a way of bringing them over from accounts payable. And we have a way of importing them into the system using a Excel or CSV or text file. So, so for purposes of today's session, I'm going to show you the manual way of adding an asset. And so right now this is an existing asset. It's not a brand new one. So I'm going to move on, and we'll walk you through those steps. Okay, so as we're setting up the assets, there's certain pieces of information that are required, and then we also have optional information depending on what you want to keep track of and what your ultimate goal is with the system. So the required information, we have certain descriptive information such as an asset ID, a brief description of the asset, the type of asset, and the status of it as well. Then we also have certain financial and depreciation information. Here we'd bring in the purchase date, any last depreciation date, what the initial value was, the type of depreciation method that you use, and also how many months it's going to take to fully depreciate this asset, and how many months are left to depreciate, and also what fund is this asset under so that the transactions post correctly. A couple pieces of optional information would be the funding source that we spoke about briefly on the user tables. And then also we have attachments, which is a way to attach assets to other assets. So, and we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so the example today, we're going to, say that, hey, I purchased a truck here in January, harsh winter, and I got a truck and a plow, and so how do I add this? Now it's September, and I bought it beginning of the year. I need to get it into the system. So to do that, we would go into our setup asset option on the main menu, and then we would click New. When we do that, the system will automatically generate the next asset ID, and from there you can proceed with putting in a brief description of your asset and put in the type of asset that you have as well as its status. And for those of you who may not know, one thing that we have in our latest releases of the applications is we've highlighted fields in yellow in cases where it's required as part of the setup or as part of any process in the system. So these are fields that you're required to enter information in one way or another. The other fields are ones that are more flexible as far as what your particular needs are. So they may or may not be populated. So after we filled out our top portion, we would put in our purchase date, and then we have in our last depreciation date. So I'm assuming that I'm depreciating this asset every month, and I've already completed that process for August. The next section down here, so we have that we're paying this out of this particular fund. And the next section over here on the right, we have our financial information. So we got a really great deal on this truck, $22,000. And I'm saying that, I'm going to have a salvage value of about $1,500 when all is said and done. So in doing that, we have so far this year expensed $1,700 in depreciation. So this will show you your year-to-date depreciation as well as your lifetime-to-date depreciation. So in this case, it's exactly the same because it's the asset we purchased it this year. Down the lower section then, we have the depreciation method, which is the straight line in this case. And when we defined this asset type, we said that this asset type has 96 months to depreciate. So in doing that, I know that we bought it in January, so I deducted the 8 months that we already depreciated this year. So this is the main form on the asset information. I'll show you a few of the other ones a little bit. One thing that we're not going to see here today is any user field information that you might want to enter some additional information. And we aren't going to look at the financial transactions and ledgers too much at this point. But based off of the asset type you select, the system will automatically bring those accounts into the setup of this asset. Okay. So one of the optional pieces of information we spoke about is the funding sources for the asset. So on the funding sources tab, we have the opportunity to put in whatever your source or sources of funding are for it. So you can have more than one, but the amounts that you put in need to add up to the initial value of your asset. The next tab that can be useful is the Attachments tab. And here we can see that in this particular example, we have the snowplow attached to the truck in this case. But you also have the option to attach the asset to another asset. So, if you're doing, let's say, a building and you added on to it, you can take this building addition and attach it to the original portion of the building. And you can see then you have the opportunity, then you can attach more than one item to the asset at the same time. Okay. Once we set up our assets, you would go and run the fund activity report from the main menu, and that kind of just gets the system then set up for the initial balances. So here we can see that we have the snowplow that I had previously set up. We also have the Ford truck that we brought into the system as well. We have here, you can see the initial values and the depreciation amounts that we set up. The other way of bringing the information in would be from accounts payable. And here, this example is you're on the invoice screen, and you would go to the items purchase tab and select the asset checkbox. Then when you're done, you would go back onto the main menu and accounts payable, and there is an option there to send this asset into the fixed assets application. It's probably more something that you would do as the year goes on, not necessarily part of the initial setup. The third option would be to, like I alluded to, the Excel sheet. And unfortunately, I don't have an example of that spreadsheet right now, but that might be a more efficient way of bringing in the assets during an initial conversion. So when you're ready to set them up, if you want to pursue that option, you just let us know, and we'll work with you on getting everything in there appropriately and bringing that into the system. So after you brought in all of your assets, we have the asset listing menu option, which is a place you can go in and you can see all the assets that you have set up in the system. So, and then off to the right, which is a part you can't see right now, but is something that I'm sure you've seen in other parts of the application. Off to the right, we have different fields that you can use to filter the information on this screen. So you can see that we have our truck again that we brought in, and our plow. I did not specify any locations for these, but it would show you that as well. And you can, again, filter for that and sort on it. We have our statuses and a little bit of the financial information on the screen as well. So this can give you more of a high-level view of all your assets without needing to go in and print out a report. Okay. Just a quick second to see if anybody has any questions at this point.
There was a couple of questions that came through, but actually you've been answering them as they right after the questions came up. Can you add an asset to an existing asset? You showed how you can do those attachment sections. So that one was answered. And is there a way to track accounts payable purchases as an asset? It's created automatically, and you showed how we can do that also through accounts payable invoices and the pending fixed assets transactions there. So that's two of them.
Right. Okay. Great. So we'll move on then. Our next section is really we're going to talk about briefly about some of the other things the system can do. Like I said earlier, the system can calculate and record the depreciation. It's something that you may or may not choose to do, but the system goes through a process and will calculate it and create any transactions needed for it. It can dispose of the assets when it reaches the end of its life, and also then it can transfer between funds. Should you, move a truck from one department into another, you can transfer that asset into the right fund. So we're going to touch on the depreciation part of things here briefly. So in doing this, we have the depreciation process on the main menu, and it's as easy as 1, 2, 3 really. You just step 1 is clear your processes. On step 2, you would calculate the depreciation. The system will go through and calculate how much it is for the time period that you selected. And then step 3 is a depreciation report that you can take a look at before you decide to move forward with these numbers. So we have an example below of what this report can look like, and we have in here, it should show you how much it's depreciating for that time period. And I apologize, I didn't see that on the screenshot, but but it would show you that. When you're happy with the calculations and the information you see on the report, step 4 would update the assets so that way you could see the depreciation information recorded on the asset that we set up in the previous section. Okay. So the last section we have is just a few of the available system reports that we have. And like I said, you may not use all of these. There may be something in here that, something we don't have that you might need. And, we can certainly talk about those needs when the time comes. So we have our asset listing report, our asset listing by category report, our asset location report, your depreciation by fund. We have a fully depreciated report, and that's one that would just show you the assets that have fully depreciated and are at the end of their life. And then we have an attachment report that would show you, for each asset, it would show you any other assets that are attached to it. So you can kind of get a better picture of where each of those assets are attached. So the next screens, I'm just going to show you a few examples of these reports based on what we've done here today. And the first one is the asset listing report, and I've highlighted the vehicle that we added. And you can see various pieces of information relating to the asset on this report. The next report is the asset listing by type. In this case, we're showing you all the vehicles in here. This one doesn't show you, what department the vehicle is in. It's just a high-level view of all your vehicles and any financial information associated with them. The next report is the asset attachments report, and here you can see that we have our snowplow attached to our new pickup truck. It'll show you the financial information for each asset on this report. Okay, so at this point, we've gone through and we did the setup on the user tables to get us started, and we're setting up our initial assets that we already have prior to the conversion, and we've gone through and we talked about the depreciation and some of the reports that we have available in the system. Just wanted to see if anybody has any questions at this time. Okay. We have a question, what do I need to do if I just want to track assets? And that's a good question. We have a lot of customers, that's all they want to do. They don't want to calculate the depreciation or anything. So you would still want to put in the cost information and maybe the purchase date on those assets, and you definitely have to specify a fund, otherwise the system will kind of bark at you a little bit. But other than that, you don't need to set up any general ledger accounts to keep track of where the transactions are going to post if you send it to the general ledger. So there's just a few less steps involved in setting that up. The next one, other question we have is whether we have a report to show any assets added this year. And we actually do have a report that would do that. It wouldn't necessarily have to be this year. You would just put in a date and it would show you any assets added after that date. Are there any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Well, I thank you everybody for your time today. I hope I've given you some good information to help get started with fixed assets. Just remember that, when you're ready to get started, if you need any assistance, to contact our support, our office, and speak with Lisa, and she'll get somebody involved, and we'll get you started. So,
well, thank you, Nancy. Great job. I just want to remind everyone that this will conclude this session, and there are 2 sessions left for today. There's one at 2 o'clock, which is Ask the Experts. It's an open forum that we're having where you can ask questions about any of the applications to a group of people that we're going to be putting in on the hot seat in front of you. And then there's a final session today, which is at 3 o'clock. It's what to expect in 2015, and Dave Christ is going to be hosting that one. So thank you very much for your time today, and this concludes this session, and we will possibly see you online for the next 2 sessions. Thanks.
Thank you.